Let's talk about callback functions. What are they? What's the big deal? And how can we use them? So here we have a function called say hello. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass in some other function. Other function, let's call it other function like this. And what we're going to do is when we call say hello, we're going to pass in some function called my function. For example, my function. Well, what is my function? Let's define it here. Function, my function. It's gonna do something. What is it gonna do? Let's just console log. This is inside my function. And we know that functions are really powerful when you pass parameters to them, some input, and then they return some output. But just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just gonna have my function just console log something, which I know I'm going against what I recommend, or not I recommend, but the rules of thumb, but just keep that in mind. So what are we gonna do here? We're gonna basically, in other function here, I have the ability of saying other function, go ahead and do something and invoke it, and then here we can say console log the end of the say hello function, right? Something like that. And so that's what we're going to do here. Other function, that's the same here. And so let's go ahead and invoke. Well, let's go ahead and run this, right? So it says goodbye, Michael. Let's just see what's happening here. We're basically console logging this result, which is say hello. But what we want to do is go ahead and call say hello with my function. My function attached to it, and other functions here. We don't want to return. That's the problem. We don't want to return this. Let's just say console log. This is the good thing why I do this on the fly, so that you could all see what could be the problem as I try to troubleshoot it, and you guys can see what is my mechanism for finding out what the issue could be. So anyway, goodbye Michael happens, right? That's what's happening here. Goodbye Michael happens. Then this is inside my function, because that's what we invoke here. This is inside my function. We're invoking this one. We don't have to call it that. We can call it, if we call it Apple here, it doesn't matter what we call it, as long as we're being consistent. And just to make sure you understand, it doesn't matter the name. It doesn't have to be callback. It doesn't have to be my function. It doesn't have to be anything like that. There's no reason for that madness, for that name anyway. So what's the big deal here? The big deal is that we can pass functions like my function. We can pass that over to another function like say hello. We pass it here. And so we can accept it here as Apple or whatever the parameter name we want to give it. And then we can call it back. And that's why we call it a callback function, because we can call that function that we're passing into this function, we can call it back. We can say if some condition, right? We can have some if condition here. And if the condition is met, then go ahead and call this function. Otherwise, don't do it, or whatever the requirements could be. So again, this is just the idea behind, functions as citizens, right? First-class citizens, right, of a language. And in this case, it's JavaScript, and that's what we're doing. It's a functional way of handling functions like citizens, just like we handle integers and floats and booleans and anything else that we may want to pass to a function. We can pass a function and we could return a function, which is very, very important. This is just here to highlight what the definition of a callback is, and we know that is when we pass a function to a function, and then we can invoke that function within that function however we want. In the real world, when do we use callback functions? Well, we really use callback functions all the time when we're dealing with the front end, and really anytime we're dealing with events, not just the front end, but anytime we have events. When this event happens, hey, go ahead and do this, right? And lastly, the only thing I want to make sure we understand here is that if we pass in my function like this, it's just a reference. But if we do the left and right parentheses, this is invoking the function. You don't want to do that. Just be mindful of that. This is passing the reference to the function. We're not invoking it yet. And so when we pass it to this function, that's just a reference. And then here, we're actually invoking it. Notice the left and the right, the left parentheses and the right parentheses. And we are invoking that function. If we just did something like this, that wouldn't really do anything. That's just a reference to the function. And if you printed that out, like console log apple without the parentheses, you'll see that's just a reference to that function. Hope this makes sense.